Okay.
I saw you. Good morning, everyone. If I could ask people to take your seats and get settled. My name is Jason Sharman. It's a great pleasure to welcome you to the 7th Annual Bahamas Research Conference on Financial Crime. I'll just briefly introduce our panelists making opening remarks, and then I've got some short housekeeping comments, and then we'll move straight into panel one. So our first speaker, it's my great pleasure to introduce and welcome to the podium the Governor of the Central Bank of the Bahamas, our host, Governor Roll. We're very honored also to have the Attorney General of Bahamas here as well. He'll be speaking second. And then third, Philip Kiefer from Inter-American Development Bank, a consistent supporter of the conference. So we're very pleased to have all three here. I'll hand over to the Governor. Please join me in welcoming him to the stage.
Thank you, and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the 7th Annual Bahamas Research Conference on Financial Crimes. I want to begin by thanking Professor Jason Sharma for his leadership as chairman in organizing this conference. I am once again very impressed by the remarkable selection of papers and topics which will be covered at this year's conference. I also wish to thank my colleagues at the Central Bank of the Bahamas for their time and commitment in making this conference possible. Let me extend a warm Bahamian welcome to all of our scholars and guests, those who've traveled to be here, as well as all of you who are joining us virtually. So let me also at this point acknowledge some of our distinguished guests among us today, including Ms. Elisa Diana Madrazo, who's the president of the Financial Action Task Force. She's joining us virtually. Ms. Dawn Spicer, also joining us virtually. She's the executive director of the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force. Senator the Honorable Ryan Pinder, the Attorney General of the Bahamas. It's always good for you to have you here. The Honorable Lorna Smith, who's the Minister of Financial Services, Economic Development and Digital Transformation for the British Virgin Islands. Mr. Esteban Fullen, the Executive Secretary of the Financial Action Task Force Group for Latin America, representatives from the Inter-American Development Bank, representatives from the Attorney General's Office of the Bahamas, colleagues from the Bahamas Group of Financial Services Regulators, and all of our Bahamian industry leaders and stakeholders present here today. We are very grateful to the IDB for their ongoing commitment as a sponsor and providing the translation services for this event. Let me say that for the reason why we started this event and we continue to convene it, the Central Bank of the Bahamas continues to find tremendous value in this annual research event. It encourages data-driven inquiries into how, at the international level, the fight against financial crimes can become more effective. It places a focus on how the cost and resourcing of our efforts can be more effectively tailored across all jurisdictions, regardless of their size. It also continues to emphasize the importance of access to data across the regulatory and enforcement landscapes, and it reinforces the value of cross-border cooperation in strengthening access to data. For the cross-section of Bahamian and public and private sector representatives who are participating or exposed to these proceedings, we also use this as an opportunity to boost our jurisdictional capacity to counter money laundering and other illicit financial transactions. And consistent with how we view this conference as a part of and alongside other members of the Bahamas Group of Financial Services Regulators, the Central Bank of the Bahamas, use these as a ways to continue to show how committed we are to developing and enhancing our regulatory and supervisory standards and ensuring that they remain aligned with the best global practices and standards. Beyond our international commitment, the effectiveness in the fight against financial crimes is also about safeguarding the stability of our financial sector, enhancing the resilience of the sector, and ensuring that legitimate commerce continues to thrive in the Bahamas on a cross-border basis. And these outcomes rest collectively on the confidence and trust that we maintain, or that our correspondent banking relationships are able to maintain in us. Moreover, to the extent that we achieve successful outcomes, they also allow us to confidently adopt and continuously refine risk-based systems that promote greater economic and financial inclusions, from which the rewards are greater social cohesion and stability, strengthen stability at a national level within our country. Having this perspective also explains why we are steadfastly committed to achieving robust and compliant outcomes for effectiveness against the FATF standards in the upcoming 5th round of the CFATF mutual evaluation, which for the Bahamas, going to begin later this year. And so again, this is an opportunity for us to prepare ourselves through these types of exposures. Having said that, it is my hope that this research conference continues to stimulate policy discussions that drive improvements in the formulation and implementation of international standards, particularly where risk-based ideas are concerned and where proportionality and tailoring becomes more prominent in how smaller jurisdictions are able to demonstrate effectiveness. As I close, I trust that over the next 2 days, we will all seize on the opportunity to engage, network, and forge meaningful connections with academics, compliance professionals, regulators, and industry experts. I also hope that the relationship that we form over these next 2 days continue to inspire collaboration and innovation in our fight against financial crimes. Thank you for your participation and contributions, and I wish you a rewarding conference, but also look forward to seeing you again in 2027. Thank you. I'll invite Attorney General Pinder.
Thank you very much, Governor, and good morning to all. Protocol having been established, I wish to warmly welcome everybody to the 7th Annual Bahamas Research Conference on Financial Crime, particularly our visitors, our esteemed presenters who have traveled to be with us. And I see the cold weather in different parts of the world, and I know you're pleased to be in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I would like to thank the executives of the Central Bank of the Bahamas and the organizing committee of this conference for this opportunity to bring welcome remarks at this 7th AML Research Conference. I would also like to acknowledge key supporters of this event, particularly the Bahamian banking and trust industry. I also want to recognize the leadership of the Central Bank in ensuring this research conference has become the place to be to discuss empirical research and the implementation strategies with respect to anti-money laundering, counter-financing terrorism, and proliferation. At the 4th conference held in 2023, I focused much of my welcome at that time on the multinational organizations and the supernatural groups, as I call them, who have gone to great lengths over the years to paint international financial centers like the Bahamas in the poorest of lights regarding taxation and money laundering, without much solid efforts or evidence to support their sordid hit jobs on us. I emphasized in the presence of Raja Kumar, the president of the FATF at the time, and for AML, CFT, and CFP purpose, the FATF is the recognized body internationally that sets the standards for every country to comply with. That their requirements are robust, the obligations on countries are significant, and we, like other countries, do what we need to do to comply at the fullest levels. At that time, I articulated the challenge when other institutions, organizations, or multilateral bodies try to represent themselves as international standard-setting bodies, prescribing standards that are different from that of those of the recognized bodies, in this context, the FATF. I noted that fairness dictates that institutions such as the FATF reaffirm themselves as the only standard-setting body and do not let others, in certain instances, rogue organizations, supplant those standards. At that time, we knew that the EU was organizing its own AML body to regulate these matters. I say, don't let anyone tell you that advocacy does not work, even from small states like the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. Over the past year, the Financial Action Task Force and the European Union have worked collaboratively to better align their respective processes. This effort seeks to address long-standing inconsistencies that existed, particularly situations where jurisdictions were removed from the FATF gray or blacklist. However, they remained on an EU AML blacklist. Let's figure that out, especially since all of the EU members are FATF members. This alignment is both timely and is important, as it promises greater objectivity, greater transparency, and consistency in assessments, without political considerations influencing the process. The development comes at a critical moment. The FATF's fifth round of mutual evaluations commenced this year in 2025, just last year. And the Caribbean Financial Action Task Force, CFATF, their on-site evaluations will begin in March of 2026, this year, just a couple months from now. They begin with Trinidad and Tobago among the first jurisdictions to be assessed in the fifth round, followed closely thereafter by Jamaica, and then the Bahamas, us, later this year. For the past 6 years, this conference has served as an important platform for scholars, regulators, and practitioners to engage in thoughtful discussion on the global fight against money laundering and terrorist financing and the standards established by the FATF. We have examined the AML and CFT requirements. We have explored potential biases in mutual evaluation methodologies and considered whether the significant financial and institutional efforts required of countries are producing the outcomes that meaningfully strengthen the fight against financial crime. Against this backdrop, the Bahamas is preparing for its next mutual evaluation, scheduled for October of this year, 2026. Since 2002, we as a jurisdiction have undergone 4 mutual evaluations as part of our efforts to comply with the FATF 40 recommendations, while also promoting stronger engagement from our private sector. As a country, we have invested heavily in legislative reform, institutional frameworks, technology, and human capital to keep pace with the evolving standards that seem to change or evolve every single year. We have invested in the compliance team at the Office of the Attorney General, having almost doubled its size since I became Attorney General just a little over 4 years ago. We have invested in digital platforms, training, and industry support, costing millions of dollars a year for us to comply. Small country like us, millions of dollars a year, all at the expense of the Bahamian people. Not my expense, but my citizens' expense. That's who pays for this. I want to commend the leadership at the Office of the Attorney General, our National Identified Risk Coordinator, Cassandra Nottage, our Assistant Director of Legal Affairs, Michelle Dean, who is here, and as I call her, our Chief Compliance Officer, Ms. Tiffany Moss, and the entire cadre of attorneys, professionals, and staff in the department. It's not an easy job. It's not easy keeping pace with the changes. It's not easy as a small jurisdiction to be able to prove that we are mighty and we are competent and we are able. Our team does it well. The investments that we are making are extraordinary. The investment we have made and the commitment we have reinforced raises an important and often uncomfortable question for us to ask. Is the burden placed on small developing states of the Bahamas just too heavy? Is it too heavy for us to bear? Some will argue that it is, and if you ask our industry, they will tell you that their expenses and investment in compliance are extraordinary and too heavy for them to bear. But what is the cost of not being a fighter in this arena? The governor referenced it. The answer is a clear, denial of access to the much needed financial delivery channels and markets. The governor mentioned correspondent banking as an example. The Bahamas experienced this firsthand during its placement on the FATF gray list from October 2018 to December 2020. When we saw foreign direct investment in our country slow down, cross-border financial transactions faced increased scrutiny, delays, and additional costs to all of those doing business in the country. At this conference, I have called for an empirical study on the cost-benefit analysis of compliance to countries like mine, as compared to the larger, more developed FATF and OECD members. Maybe we will see this on the agenda next year. Preparation for the FATF's fifth round mutual evaluations formally commenced in 2022, following the Bahamas' removal from the EU AML blacklist. Even public sector agencies are 11 public sector agencies are actively engaged in these preparations, as the Bahamas works to maintain its 40 for 40 ratings of compliant and largely compliant with the FATF's 40 recommendations. At the time that we achieved our 40 for 40 status in early 2022, we were only the 6th country in the world to achieve that. Think about that. Only the 6th country in the world, and only the 2nd country in this hemisphere to achieve that standard, a standard of excellence. We must ensure this rating is maintained, and thus our public sector agencies have increased investments in human resources, in technical systems, training programs, all to strengthen institutional capacity and effectiveness. Over the past 5 to 7 years, the Bahamas is undertaking a comprehensive overhaul on its legislation, its regulation, its supervisory initiatives and enforcement frameworks. National risk assessments for money laundering, terrorist financing, proliferation financing have been completed. In addition, the 2021 National Money Laundering Strategy has been updated to cover periods out to 2028. While we remain hopeful that our preparations will result in a successful mutual evaluation outcome, we recognize that challenges in complying with evolving international financial crime standards will persist. Nevertheless, we are resilient. We are resilient people. And we remain committed to being a strong and cooperative partner in the global fight against financial crime. Research opens our minds to new ideas, emerging risks, and evolving trends. Conferences such as this play a vital role in strengthening our financial systems by informing regulators, informing our law enforcement, our prosecutors, and by supporting effective and proportionate AML-CFT frameworks. Several of the topics to be presented this year, including transnational corruption and asset recovery, real estate investments in politically exposed persons, and the relationship between suspicious transaction reporting and money laundering convictions are particularly timely and should generate robust discussion. It is in the spirit that I look forward to your deliberations, particularly those that examine the practical challenges of achieving technical compliance with demonstrating real effectiveness under these international standards. I want to thank you all for your attendance. I want to pay special mention and welcome to a regional colleague, the Honorable Lorna Smith, the Minister of Financial Services, Economic Development and Digital Transformation of the British Virgin Islands. The Minister is well aware of the challenges of small island and developing states in achieving compliance with FATF and other standards set by multilateral institutions. Standards set without input from countries like ours. No input. But we have to comply. I wish you all a very productive and engaging conference, and hopefully we'll come out with some great results and great studies. I want to thank you for coming.
I just wanted to add the IDB's voice of welcome to this conference. It's really an amazing event, I have to say. This is my first time here. I wanted to thank the Central Bank for its fabulous organization, the Attorney General for really an inspiring, even righteous remarks that he just made. And I want to thank Jason as well for his driving motivation behind this conference. It's without him, this wouldn't happen. I also wanted to talk about the uniqueness of this event. I just don't know of another event in any discipline where policymakers, civil society, and academics get together for not just kind of a show, but for a productive conversation. And that's because this is an area where a productive conversation really can take place between these three groups. The academics can't do anything without information and without knowing what's going on in a very murky area. But who knows what's going on? Civil society and policymakers know what's going on. Policymakers are sometimes reluctant to act. We know that investment in detecting and prosecuting financial crimes varies a lot around the world. And sometimes there needs to be some prompting to increase that investment. And that's where civil society comes in. So I feel like this is not just a show of synergies, but there are actual synergies here. So it's quite remarkable. And I think the IDB is privileged to have been a part of this for the last 7 years. And I guess I wanted to finally emphasize how important this is, in particular for the IDB and for development organizations in general. We think that the predicate crimes that underlie financial crimes, all the things that take place before that lead to these illicit flows of funds, are a real drag on development. But we don't have very many entry points to work with countries to control those. So working through this financial crime aspect, or this channel, is kind of a fundamental tool that we have for addressing this important impediment to development. But we're also dedicated to the notion of development effectiveness. We need to be putting our resources, and countries need to be putting their resources towards things that really make a difference. And I think that's where the academic frontier and the big uncertainties are. Because what we really are concerned about is, as we prosecute financial crimes and detect them, are we seeing reductions in procurement fraud? Are we seeing reductions in corruption? Are we seeing reductions in those things in the countries that are the drag on development? And I think that's a hard goal, but I think that's ultimately where all of this leads. And that kind of echoes what the Attorney General said. What is all of this millions of dollars being invested by the Bahamas? How is it contributing to improved welfare in the countries from which these illicit financial flows are going? That is the first order crucial question. And it's a very expensive show if it's not having a real impact on development outcomes. But I welcome you all here. This is a fabulous event, and thank you for letting me share some remarks with you.
Thanks very much to all of our three.
The least econometric component of all the papers. But if we have to speak about threats, and if we have to speak about criminals, also a sociological or criminological perspective, I think it's quite relevant. So I will speak about false invoicing. You know, I guess most of you know what false invoicing is, but just to provide you a brief definition, we can briefly define it as the issuance or the use of invoices for services or transactions which are fictitious or whose value reported does not correspond to the actual value of what is exchanged. Now, this is not at all a new brand topic. It's not a new financial crime trend. So it's something which goes back in the years. And actually, if you may remember, in 2006, the FATF already published a report on trade-based money laundering, which makes false invoicing as one of its main ingredients. But this has was somehow revamped in recent months because especially because of this involvement of false invoicing as a way to launder money from drug trade, especially from fentanyl trade, and involving especially criminal money laundering organization as alerted by FinCEN, among others, but also by European authorities and other authorities across the world. So the point was, okay, let's try to look at a bit better what false invoicing is. Because eventually it has been quite neglected by research to date. It's a quite odd offense because it's, in a way, it is in between an administrative violation and a criminal offense on the one side. It has always been interpreted as a kind of minor felony, minor offense, not really serious or not as serious as other type of offenses, and also quite technical. So both criminologists, sociologists, but even economists try to stay a bit far from it. But indeed, it can teach us quite much about how serious crime, how serious predicate offenses evolve, and also how offenders may evolve. There are some exceptions, of course. There are some legal studies which looked at that. There are studies which provide estimates of trade-based gaps, like GFI style, but where false invoicing may play a role, but these are macroeconomic estimates, really do not look at the offense itself. Recently, there are some studies about shell companies, namely also by the Italian FIU and other researchers, which are heavily employed in false invoicing, as we will see. But again, the focus is not on defense. So this paper tried to look at it, try to understand why false invoicing is implemented, how it works, who are the actors behind it, adopting, as said, a more criminological and sociological approach. Now, the method. So this is an ongoing project. So what I'm presenting today is just some preliminary results of an analysis of 200 cases initiated by Italian authorities in 1.5 years in between 2024 and June 25. We are expanding it. We are looking at other countries nowadays. And as many other case study analysis in this field has to rely on a varied array of sources. So we looked at judicial files, judicial documents, police press releases and reports, open sources, news aggregators, and we scraped them, both by looking at specific violations, criminal violations. Here mentioned are those referring to the Italian, regulatory system, which on tax crimes, but also looking at certain keywords and keywords combination. And then we did a content analysis as made by other papers in this field, trying to extract some relevant information. Now, obviously, this approach has a limitation. The first is, the sampling. Is the sample which you eventually identify really representative? And especially when one uses media and open sources, there is this newsworthiness bias. So probably only newsworthy cases which end up on media are not the universe, of course, and maybe biased in terms of their representation. Together with this, we did also an assessment, an empirical assessment of shell companies in a way to validate some of the results of the case study analysis by adapting and applying empirically an indicator of shell company, as we see, developed by Italian FIU a few years ago, and to see how this distributes across Europe. But I will tell it in a minute. Now, just 2 elements of background. The first, false invoicing in Italy is increasing steadily. Okay, these are data from the Italian Guardia di Finanza, so the finance police, which is not public, but we could have access to that. And basically, the number of individuals and reported violations in the past 5 years has increased steadily by 60%. Okay, and this is quite important if we consider that in Italy, as many other Western countries, we have a crime drop. But this type of crime instead is increasing. This is the first element. The second element is that many authorities in Italy are stressing the increasing link between false invoicing and mafia-type organization. So if some kind of effect arguments, like mafia is passed from rifles to the tax form, as a way, as an instrumental crime. And this is repeated many instances. And this is another area which was interesting for us to understand why. So mafia-type organizations, so the typical, I would say, the paradigmatic example of criminal organization may be interested in such a technical offense. And so this paper addresses all this point. Some few results. First, just to remind how false invoicing may work. This is a typical scheme, quite frequent, but the basic one, so the level 0. So we have a company called Alpha, which is the supplier of the false invoices, which issue an invoice to a company beta client, which pays back the amount in via wire transfer, bank transfer, or in any case, a traceable instrument. So company Alpha gives back the amount in cash of the records after keeping a fee. Okay, this is the very basic scheme. There are many sophistication out of it, involvement of third companies, the cashback delivery is not really necessary, but this helps to understand what is the behind false invoicing, what are the benefits. And there are benefits, many benefits. I always refer to false invoicing as a kind of kitchen robot. Kitchen robot can stir, can chop, can heat, and false invoicing also serves many purposes. So what are the benefits for the supplier? Well, first, it may make extra profit from the fees. By inflating artificially the revenues, it can use it for laundering money. It can, manipulating the accounts in order to get public and private funds, so fraudulently. It can conceal behind false invoicing extortion or usury or other type of illegal scheme. What are the benefits for the client? First, reducing tax burden by inflating the cost, by reduce the taxable income and therefore reducing tax burden, or generating false VAT credits, generating slush funds, so to distract, so to embezzle company funds to buy, for example, personal item, or for bribing other people. So it's really a multi-purpose crime. And this has to be remembered when we look at the actors, because obviously even legal actors, legal entrepreneurs could serve as client of providers. Okay? And this so constitutes a kind of link between a typical criminal economy and the legal economy. All these motivations appear in the data set that we have analyzed, especially tax-related motivations, but also money laundering. In 30% of the cases, we found that false invoicing was used to launder money, especially coming from other predicate offenses. Other modi operandi. So first of all, use of foreign companies and foreign bank accounts in 30% of the cases with foreign individuals, especially of Chinese nationality. We discussed about that. Shell companies as well, many times, very frequently, also abroad and not only abroad. Other interesting amounts, so we try to estimate the gross amount, especially the VAT amount evaded based on what was reported by the files, the cases, and out of 200 cases, 2.5 billion euro VAT amount evaded, for example. We looked at the average fee applied, which was not reported every time, but an average fee of 8% with a quite variance from 1.5 to 22%, which is not by chance, is the exact VAT rate. Sorry, is the exact VAT rate in Italy. So here we can see a kind of shift of resources from the state, from the public to private entities. All sectors are somehow represented, some more than others. Wholesale and retail trade, especially of metals, of plastic materials. This is quite frequent, of gas and gasoline. And in terms of jurisdiction, we see China involved, but also a lot Eastern Europe, especially Bulgaria, which, just to remind, is the only EU country included currently in the FATF grey list. Why Eastern Europe? Well, proximity, but also cash intensity could be one of the reasons. This is something that has to be looked at better. So to validate these results on the distribution of jurisdiction, we looked, as said, at the distribution of shell companies. So we constructed a shell company indicator based on financial and accounting anomalies on previous FIU model, enriched with further patterns. First of all, mass registration patterns, and then information about the owners and the beneficial owners of firms, especially looking at if there was at least one owner coming from a high-risk Italian municipality. So we attributed this indicator across 250 million companies in Europe, see how they distributed, and the distribution is the one you can see there, as a ratio on the number of firms in those countries having Italian owners. And you see how Eastern Europe again pops up. Romania, but again, Bulgaria and other. Now, few words to conclude on the actors. Chinese criminal networks, as said, involved in 15% of the cases with many roles, both as beneficiaries or suppliers or subcontractors, and especially in the cashback delivery stage. So wide use of this underground banking, the Feinqian, so this Awala type underground banking, with some sophistication, some use of encrypted messaging tools or cryptocurrency in few cases, especially stablecoin. And the applications of very, very low fees, especially if compared to other providers. And this has some reason we can discuss in the Q&A session, maybe. What about mafias? So here, just one point, maybe this is more on the sociological side, but I think it's very important. So acting as both beneficiaries, but also as suppliers of false invoicing services. Why? Well, there are many benefits. First, the clients of false invoicing are usually reliable and desirable clients, especially if compared to other illicit markets. Second, false invoicing provides advantages to the victims. Let's think a victim of extortion who has to pay a kickback for a false invoice, well, he can reduce taxes. And this is key, especially for mafias, but not only, because, this is a wiretap. It's very folkloristic, but you say a victim of extortion say, well, I pay it as a consultancy fee, so I pay it clean. I get out from Tarantelle. So I realize this is very folkloristic, but there are many instances like this. So basically, false invoicing blurs the boundaries between what is victimization, benefits, and collusion. So it really helps to create a kind of continuum of services that organized crime can provide to legal business, because the difference between tax optimization and an extortion eventually is probably just the fee, no more than that. This is our case, it was Italian and 'Ndrangheta affiliates providing false invoicing to legal entrepreneurs, and through that laundering money, and they relied on Chinese with further false invoicing triangulations, which then were those eventually providing the cash physically to the clients. And so you see also this cooperation between different types of criminal actors. To conclude, some policy implication. First, there is the need to improve the capacity. So the difficulty of false invoicing is that it's very hard to identify if a transaction is based on a fictitious trade or not. And this is because you need to triangulate and combine different types of data. And the difficulty in accessing tax and trade data is the problem. So probably the need to expand the access by authorities in AML sphere, but also obliged entity to this kind of information, and stricter cooperation between FIUs, tax and custom authorities. Second point, shell companies are key. We need to improve the ability to detect them early. And this could be done even at business register level. The point is that business registers are usually reluctant to do that, but to identify mass registration patterns and certain patterns could be done at that stage. And then about cash and capital controls. So even small amount of cash are really relevant and functional to the effectiveness of the false invoicing market. And therefore, to keep low cash threshold seems to be still quite effective. And the second thing is, okay, apparently the low fees applied by Chinese providers can be related to the high fees that they apply in China as a service, to circumvent the capital control. So one of the question is what happened? So what would be the impact of the regulating capital control on China on this market? I think this is just an open question. Thank you indeed.
And Mike Levy did not have to wave his hand agitatedly. Our second speaker is Sean Foley from Macquarie University. Why don't you come up here?
Someone got the slides there? Oh, here we go. Great. So I'm Professor Sean Foley. I'm at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia. So it's very happy to be here in the Bahamas. It's my first time. And this is some work that has come out of a lot of analysis I've done of illicit behavior and criminal behavior in the cryptocurrency market, specifically in Bitcoin. Here we look at the economics of ransomware as a service, which is really a part of a revolutionization of many industries that cryptocurrency has facilitated. If we think about something like eBay and Amazon, they were able to revolutionize the retail commercial space. So they needed to do that, a communication system, which was the internet, and a digital payment system, which was PayPal or Visa. What we've started to see is that cryptocurrencies and the anonymity that they provide can revolutionize some of the other kinds of industries that typically relied on cash. So if we think about something like the Silk Road, the ability to purchase drugs online, a kind of marketplace for illicit substances, Bitcoin was the payment mechanism that allowed for that to really proliferate and change the way that drugs have been purchased since then. Cryptocurrency promises a lot of things. It promises to revolutionize payments, fintech, decentralized finance. We've seen that it has revolutionized illicit drug markets. And one thing that it has now done is to revolutionize this or industrialize this system of ransomware attacks. I think this is of particular importance to the Bahamas regulatory regime, as, for example, FTX was located here and famously exploded in a kind of wash of lost money, right? And so I think it's very important to understand what is actually happening with these cryptocurrencies and the actors that are utilizing them. Ransomware beginnings, really, it's kind of like computer viruses. In the old, well, before we had cryptocurrencies, computer viruses might try to do things like steal your credit card numbers or conduct denial of service attacks on specific companies' websites. These days, the computer virus comes and encrypts your computer. And the user will then be provided with an address to send Bitcoin to recover that data. This really started around 2017 with the WannaCry attack, which infected over 300,000 computers. So this was kind of famous, became newsworthy. It exploited a problem in Microsoft Windows. They released a patch, everyone could get away with it. And typically you were asking for small ransom. So if you think about an individual's capacity to pay, it's not necessarily very large. They were asking for somewhere less than $1,000 to unlock all of your documents. And this was typically targeting individuals. This is the kind of screen that you would have been presented with if your computer was locked. So it tells you, look, you can recover your files. You need to send this amount of Bitcoin to this specified address. We'll give you the code to unlock your computer. You can have your photos and your documents back. What we have seen since 2017 is this specialization. So it's gone from being single actors trying to attack individuals to a kind of two-tier system. So we call this ransomware as a service. And this specializes into two teams. So there are ransomware operators. These ransomware operators create and license sophisticated software. So they're acting more like software companies. Think of a Microsoft, Amazon, Google. They're building really complicated systems that can, or viruses, if you like, that can encrypt and lock an entire organizations like servers, databases. And then there are affiliates. So affiliates might be someone at my university, the IT guy figures out that he can access the system, or someone finds a vulnerability in an organization that allows them an in. So the affiliates pay fees to use the operator's software, relying on their technical skill. And they get the access to the sensitive systems, and they deploy the software that has been generated by the ransomware operators. What we see as part of this is that the ransomware, the affiliates who collect the fee, that with the ransomware operators. And so this split is typically 20%. If a $100 ransom was collected, $20 would go to the ransomware family, the developer of the software, and $80 would go to the affiliate, the person who found the vulnerability and was able to infiltrate the system. So we're really seeing this kind of specialization that we hadn't seen before. Give you some examples of where this has occurred. So in 2021, the Colonial Pipeline, which carries 45% of the fuel on the US East Coast, was shut down for over 5 days at a really large cost. They ended up paying a $4.4 million ransom to the ransomware operator DarkSide. And the way that their system was infiltrated was that they had an inactive VPN key, which was bought on the darknet, and they were then able to use that to infiltrate the systems and shut down the entire pipeline. There are three main types of attacks that we see. So there's pure extortion. So here you might think of a bank whose customers' details have been exfiltrated. So you've got sensitive data. You might be a healthcare fund, a telecommunications operator. We're able to copy and take your data, customers' usernames, passwords, credit cards, and then we threaten to release this information onto the darknet if you fail to pay us. There are other kinds of things that we can do that might annoy you. So there is double extortion, where I both have taken your data and threatened to release it, but I also encrypt your system. So something like the Colonial Pipeline setup, right? I've caused some problem for your business apart from the fact that I've taken your customers' lists. I can then also, if I want to undertake multiple extortion, I can then start to keep your IT team busy by conducting denial of service attacks on your infrastructure as well. So there are various levels of threat that these actors can pose to organizations. JBS, which is one of the largest meat operations in the world, they paid $11 million ransom in Bitcoin after an attack shut down the operation. So you can see that there are really large payments that are going on. These are no longer like $1,000, I've locked your computer, and you say, well, that's okay, I'll pay $2,000 to get a new laptop, right? These are really large organizations, what they call big game hunting. In Australia, Medibank Australia, who I happen to be with, lost all of my data, along with 10 million Australians. The population of Australia is about 26 million, so around 40% of the Australian population had some of their data released because Medibank refused to pay ransom. They said, look, we're not going to pay you, and they said, okay, well, that's fine. We're going to take all of the information we've got about people's medical records, their passport numbers, their dates of birth, their names, their addresses, and we're just going to dump it onto the darknet. So if you look hard, you can go and find my passport number and my medical records. So this is the threat that the companies face, right? If you fail to pay, we will do something that we believe is damaging to your organization. So the observed scale of this, we can look at this ransomware as a service, which is the orange line. And we can see that starting in 2016, this started to really get quite large and overtake what we call commodity ransomware, or those sort of more smaller scale attacks. And you're looking at over upwards of $30 million a year that's being extorted from companies. And this is only what we can detect through the way that we detect it. So the true scale is likely much larger. So we think about this as a kind of forensic finance task. So we need to try to first find the ransomware addresses, and I'll show you how we do that. We then cluster these addresses on the Bitcoin blockchain to identify other addresses which have not been self-reported but belong to the same actors. We then classify them into ransomware as a service or commodity ransomware, and we then examine exchange hot wallets to see where these payments actually land. So we can kind of follow the money, if you like, through the blockchain and see where the cash outs are coming or what kind of exchanges these are hitting. In order to find the ransomware addresses, there's a few resources where people can effectively self-report. Hey, I've been the subject of a ransomware attack. Here's the address that I sent the money to. Here's a screenshot of the request that was given to me. And so ransomware.re, these guys have collected many addresses that we're able to utilize. The second step in the forensic finance process is to cluster the Bitcoin blockchain addresses. So here you can see an example of 2 transactions. Each transaction, each string of numbers is effectively a Bitcoin address. And you can see that the last address in the first transaction and the first address in the second transaction are the same. And what this tells me is that all of those addresses used to send Bitcoins belong to the same person. It's sort of like if I pay with multiple bills from the same wallet, it's likely the same person, or it has to be the same person who sent these. And so what this allows us to do is to cluster all of those 10 addresses together and say, these all belong to the same person, because I can identify one overlapping link in those addresses. This clustering allows us to go, we were able to identify, or there were self-reported addresses of 7,500 ransomware as a service addresses and 186 commodity ransomware addresses. We were then able to expand this using this kind of clustering algorithm to get almost 9,000 addresses of ransomware attacks. The third thing that we needed to do was to classify as ransomware as a service or commodity ransomware. So one thing we're able to do is to use known ransomware families. So there's DarkSide, there's a whole bunch of kind of famous ransomware providers. So we know that those are ransomware as a service operators. And we also can leverage the known attributes of the addresses to try to determine whether they're ransomware as a service or commodity ransomware. And we can then look to observe this splitting behavior on the blockchain of the commission. So what you'll see is the ransom is paid. You see the ransom being paid on the blockchain. You then subsequently see it split off into 2 transactions, one of approximately 20% and one of approximately 80%. And this allows you to identify that it's a ransomware as a service type of attack. Here you can see when we split it by ransomware as a service or traditional commodity ransomware are typically sending out 95 to 100% of the fee of the ransom to another address for further laundering. The commodity ransomware, the ransomware as a service at the top, we see that there's a lot more splitting going on. So much higher proportion are sending somewhere between 70 to 90% to one address, with the remainder sent to a second address. Here we can see ransomware as a service, the kind of percentage of the transaction that's being split. So if we look at the bottom one with the pink, the yellow line, we see that almost 100% of the ransom gets sent out directly to somewhere else. So we can think of that as cashing out or going to further launder. When we look at the ransomware as a service, the yellow line, we see that there's typically around this sort of 75 to 80%, and that value is kind of coming down through time, which could be a sense of competition between the ransomware operators. So I can say, look, you could go with his ransomware service or my ransomware service. Mine may charge you a lower fee. If we look at the size of payments that we observe, we can see that the commodity ransomware focuses on ransoms that are less than $1,000. So we see that the vast majority of those orange bars fall in that sort of $0 to $100 or up to maybe $1,000. Whereas where we see the blue bars, of course, there are smaller bars, but if we look at the value in the bottom graph, we see that the vast majority of value is coming from ransoms of greater than $100,000 for ransomware as a service operators. So this is really the evidence of this big game hunting, looking to try to get $1 million, $5 million, $10 million out of a single organization, as opposed to trying to get $1,000 from 300,000 people. The total value of ransomware as a service that we have identified is more than $90 million of paid ransoms. To understand some of the ransomware receipts, we see that ransomware as a service are actually able to generate much higher dollar values of receipts. If they are generating more addresses for people to send to, we see a higher value of receipts. And we also see much higher value transactions coming through ransomware as a service. One of the interesting things that we had about these, I think a lot of the data that we observe as social scientists comes from sort of leaks. And an interesting feature that happened as we were building this paper was that one of the operations, DarkSide, they actually had their own data leaked. And so this gave us transaction logs of the negotiations that the dark side ransomware organization undertook with their victims. And so we had these 215 logs of negotiations, and so we're able to make some observations from that. So the ransomware operators are very organized. Their language always indicates a sort of we or us. They're often talking about the organization. They often reference at least 2 organizations that they're part of. The ransomware operators are also very professional. So they offer to give a report, a security report, identify how the vulnerability was exposed, even identifying other vulnerabilities that they have not exploited, and sort of trying to act more as security consultants, as it were, as part of their efforts to gain these ransoms. In 190 of 215 chat or negotiations, they were also willing to negotiate. And so the average negotiated discount was 43% from the initial fee that was asked for. And the victims are often seeming very concerned about trying to get their data back or unlock their systems, with less than 6% refusing to pay outright. So we are seeing a very high rate of payments. And for example, in Australia, this is against Australian law. You're not allowed to pay ransoms, but maybe that's the 6% is the Australian guys. So the final thing that we undertook in this was to try to understand from the exchange hot wallets, where does the money go? So we can't necessarily attribute a Bitcoin address with a location, but what we can do is we know where exchanges are based. So for example, we see here BTCE is based in Russia, Binance is based in China, we see Kraken based in the US, and so we are able to observe the hot wallets. That is the place that you deposit the funds when you're sending cash to an exchange. And you're likely sending Bitcoin to the exchange so that you can sell it and redeem it for fiat currency, whether that's US dollars or otherwise. And so we were able to trace for up to 3 hops all of the ransoms that were paid. And so what we look at is, well, where do those flows go? And so you can see this amount sent in thousands. And what we see is that millions of this is going to exchanges based in Russia. We see a little bit going to, Japan, Finland, Hong Kong, but the vast majority of the cash outs that we observe from ransomware as a service are going via Russian exchanges. Now, I can't make any assertions about whether that means that the ransomware operators were Russian or not. Simply that is where the flows are going to cash out into fiat currency. That's all. Thanks very much.
And our third paper is by Domenico Marchetti from the Bank of Italy.
Well, good morning, everybody. Thanks to the organizers for taking us to this beautiful area of the world, to the Central Bank of Bahamas. Okay, so that's the paper written with my co-authors at Bocconi University, Gianmarco Daniele, Giovanna Marcolongo, and Paolo Pinotti, and one co-author is a colleague at the Italian FIU, Marco De Simoni. So the paper is about financial distress and organized crime. So we know that organized crime is very much interested in getting into the legal economy to money launder proceeds, criminal proceeds, and to reinvest proceeds into profitable activities. Now, the question addressed by the paper is, how do criminal organizations acquire control over firms, over legal firms? That's the key question we address. So we talk about firms in financial distress, and they get money from organized crime. In turn, and for exchange, they give, they allow organized crime to enter the legal economy. They give the organized crime kind of a license or a certification to play fully in the legal economy. There is lots of anecdotal evidence from the news about the link between financial distress and organized crime infiltration. So again, the paper is about financial vulnerability and mafia in the firms. So the basic test that we make is whether firms in financial distress are more likely to be infiltrated by organized crime. To answer, we use a new measure of mafia infiltration at the firm level. This measure is also time varying. And for those of you who attended last year conference, actually there in that conference, we presented another paper based on the same measure. So it's a measure developed at the FIU, Italian FIU. And we also have data on bank credit and credit rating. We use diff and regression discontinuity design as econometric tools. So in the end, we also provide evidence that mafia infiltration helps firm survival. Okay, so that's a preview of the results. We do show that firms under financial distress, and for this we mean firms whose credit rating has been downgraded to substandard, their probability of being infiltrated increased by 5%. More precisely, the probability increases by 0.1 percentage point, since the probability of infiltration overall in the economy is 2.2%. That's a 5% increase. The effect is not concentrated in the South or in other territories being controlled by the mafia, but it's rather widespread in overall Italy. Mafia infiltration works as a the probability of survival of the firm, however, without improving the economic performance of the firm. So that's the results. Now, so our paper contributes to two fields of economic literature. One field, of course, is the mafia in the legal economy. And again, we focus on financial distress as a channel of mafia infiltration. And then, of course, we contribute to credit crunch literature in the sense that we argue that the real effects of credit crunch have to include the higher risk of infiltration for firms. So data. So these are the data from the Anti-Mafia National Prosecutor Office, whether the same individual is under investigation for mafia-related crimes. So we have a list of matched individuals, and we basically just see whether there are firms, legal firms, registered firms, which have such individuals among the owners or the managers or the auditors. That's it. It's a very simple identification mechanism. Very simple, but we believe powerful because it's based on both, a person needs to be under investigation for mafia-related crimes. In addition, he needs to be, he has been reported for suspicious financial activity. And of course, so we have a list of firms, and for these firms, we have plenty of data, balance sheet data, credit data, and so on and so forth. So that's the distribution of firms over the territory, Italian net territory. On the left, you have the share of infiltrated firms on the total of registered firms in the given province. And as you can expect, the higher shares are registered in the south of Italy, where the presence of the mafia is stronger, traditionally stronger. However, in Italy, the rich and the center are much richer and also more populated, so there are many more firms. And so you can, in general, in absolute terms. So in absolute terms, you can see that most of infiltrated firms, of course, according to our definition, of course, are in the north and in the center. So how do we measure financial distress? We have this measure of credit rating provided by an individual agency, which is called Served, which is very very popular in Italy. I mean, it's used by all banks to allocate, to study the balance sheet data of firms and to allocate the credit. So the score goes from 1 to 9. 1 to 4, the firm is creditworthy, is robust, financially robust. 5 to 6, there is some fragility. 7 to 9, high risk of bankruptcy. So basically, when a firm gets 7 or more, the bank drastically reduces credit. So we do diff and diff. So basically, for those of you who don't know, there's an econometric model. Basically, it's a way to compare downgraded firms, what happens to downgraded firms after a downgrade, with very similar firms, same size, same region, same sector, which have not been downgraded. And that's we first look at what happens to loans. So at time zero, there is a downgrade, and you can see there is a drop, 5% drop in loans on average, which goes on for 5 years. So in 5 years, you have a 30% reduction in credit. This is what happens to probability of infiltration. So presumably, because of the reduction in credit, there is a sharp increase in the probability of infiltration. Again, this is, as I said earlier, this is a 5% increase in the probability of infiltration, which is kind of stable over time, as you can see. Those are years on the x-axis. So we also use regression discontinuity design to tackle the possibility that you have reverse causation. We can rely on this RDD, which is quite powerful because the credit rating takes unit values 1, 2, 3 up to 9. However, it's based on an underlying much more granular score, which is a 2-digit score. So there is a cutoff value. So as I said, 7 is the key, the key number, right? If you get 7 as a firm, you are in trouble. And the underlying score, let's say, just an example, it's not the way it actually works, but it gives you the intuition. Let's say that the underlying score can go, 698, 699, 700, 701, and so on. Now, there is a cutoff value which is not known to the public, which is secret, not known to the banks, not known to the firms, not known to anybody, with the exception of those who compute the rating. So if a firm gets 699, let's say it gets 6 as credit rating, it's safe. If it gets 7.01, it's in trouble, it gets 7. Again, this is to give you the intuition. So this gives us this powerful tool because very often, or almost the times, firms which get 6.99 are very similar to firms who get 7.01. So it's a random event whether you get downgraded or not for the firms in the neighborhood of the cutoff value. So these are technical aspects about what I just said, technical aspects of this approach. This is the distribution of firms near the cutoff. As you can see, the distribution is very flat, which means, again, that if you are below or after the cutoff, it's really a matter of, it's a random event. So we did analysis with this tool, and again, we look at first at what happens to bank credit, and we see a drop in bank credit after the downgrade. And the size, the order of magnitude is very similar to what we found with the other tool. This is a probability of infiltration. Again, after downgrade, we see an increase in the probability of distribution of infiltration, And again, the magnitude is very similar. There is not that much heterogeneity by geographical macroregion. This means that the effect we are talking about does not take place only in the south, but it takes place actually all over Italy. And if I remember well, it's even a bit stronger in the north. Yeah. Again, the effect is also widespread across sectors, though it's strongest in the real estate. This is not a surprise, since this sector, of course, is quite interesting for money laundering purposes. This is about probability of survival. So we show in the paper that the infiltration helps probability of survival to a significant extent. However, as I mentioned earlier at the beginning, it doesn't help the economic performance of the firms. So usually after a downgrade, there is a decrease of, sales, production, employment, profits. And this is not affected by the infiltration. What I mean is that firms, after a downgrade, if a firm is infiltrated, this helps the probability, so this helps survival. However, the economic performance doesn't improve. So it's another clear sign that, organized crime is giving the money for helping their business, not for helping the firm, of course. So that's the conclusion. We show that the credit downgrades facilitates infiltration of organized crime. The effect is widespread over all the territory, not just the provinces more and more controlled by mafia. And also it's quite widespread across sectors, with the real estate being the sector where the effect is stronger, which is again consistent with the infiltration, the explanation we provided of the mechanism. And in terms of policy implication, well, this is there are not easy policy implications. Clearly, there is a strong reason to during an economic crisis, during economic hardships, to help firms in financial trouble, but which are solid from economic point of view. Yeah, it's easy to say, not easy at all to do in practice for many reasons. But the paper provides a strong reason for working in that direction. Thanks a lot.
Mike Levy barely had to raise his hand at all, let alone wave it. So I should start by saying I'm enough of an economist that I think a discussant should be fairly critical. Not enough of an economist to penetrate the serious econometric work that we just heard. And because I'm going to be critical, let me start by saying that these are three very solid papers. They make real contributions to an understanding of a phenomenon that is still very murky. And it's a reminder that money laundering, there's one word, but it describes a whole variety of institutions and behaviors. And I should start by declaring conflict of interest. Michela Riccardi and I wrote a paper together recently and continue to work together, so you should discount any praise, of which there'll be little, and amplify any criticism, of which there's not much. So let me start with Domenico Marchetti's paper. It's particularly interesting in light of a sort of notorious remark from the director of the UN Office on Drugs and Crime around 2009, in which he said that he had seen evidence that the proceeds of organized crime were the only liquid investment capital available to some banks on the brink of collapse last year. I believe he was talking just about Italy, but maybe more broadly. And of course, if he's seen evidence, we would like to see that evidence, but no evidence was forthcoming. So this really is a nice effort to sort of explore whether, in fact, organized crime does serve as a sort of lender of last resort, and what are the consequences of that. And Domenico and his colleagues have created this fascinating data set that combines both information about the sort of mafia status of individuals, business ownership, characteristics of the firms, and suspicious transaction reports. And it provides a much more credible evidence of indication than anything we've ever seen before. This is a paper from researchers at the Bank of Italy at the FIU, and one concern that I, as a traditional academic, have is, damn it, I want access to those same data. And that is an issue in this field, that there are and I'll come back to that at the end, increasingly rich data that only government researchers have access to. The principal finding is that credit constraints increase the risk of mafia infiltration by about 5%. The firms last longer, but they don't seem to do any better than the other ones. So the paper explores sort of three motivations and mechanisms for infiltration. One is simply using these firms for laundering. I would call that a low harm consequence of the infiltration, because the question is, how does that compare in terms of the harms of laundering other ways? And it's very hard to make any counterfactual comparisons here. Infiltrated firms have some competitive advantage. Arbitrarily, I'd call that a moderate harm. I'm more impressed by the fact that in Italy, increasing the power of mafia organizations through these connections is quite a serious consequence. One number that would be useful here is what share of laundering by criminal organizations occurs through this method. And the detective flows are relatively small, just $2 billion per annum. But I understand that that's simply what is detected, and we still lack that number. And in thinking about putting this study in the context of studies of money laundering generally, you have to wonder whether organized crime in Italy is better at this kind of institutionalized activity simply because it has itself been institutionalized for so much longer. And I'd be very interested to see a comparable study done in countries which have less well-established criminal organizations. Okay, so Domenico at the end of his presentation made relatively passing comments about policy implications, and in the context of the paper, that's fair. But I did want to bring up this issue of what we should do in terms of policy implications of these individual studies. So the authors suggest that preventing such infiltration requires more than criminal enforcement, calls for strengthening financial transparency, enhancing credit access for high-risk but viable firms, and equipping financial regulators with tools and data, etc. I teach in a public policy school, which is to say that I'm deeply reluctant to make public policy recommendations. A lot of my work deals with public health issues, and they have the policy equivalent of logarithmia. They just cannot write down a fact without having a policy implication. And I'm not by any means accusing Domenico and his colleagues of that, but I do think this is too simple. I mean, how precisely can we identify those at high risk? What is the cost of supporting many firms? How does that compare with the costs imposed by additional infiltration? There are moral hazard issues. I mean, would it then be good to try to sort of send signals that you're at risk of being infiltrated in order to get money? What agency should have access to all of these data? And how vulnerable would the support program itself be to being infiltrated? And sort of the pedagogical point I want to make is that their findings are very interesting. If you're going to do policy recommendations, you've got to do a policy analysis, and that is separate from this kind of descriptive research. My long-term interest is illegal markets. I first got into, most of my work deals with drug markets, but I got into this because I was interested in studying the market for money laundering services, and basically have gotten nowhere with that, so I've retreated to just studying controls instead. Can observe them. But the ransomware paper is really interesting to me. So it's basically about the emergence of a new method of ransomware that allows for a scaling up. Instead of low value, high volume, you have high value, low volume. And this is the result, seems to be, of a separation of the technology developers from the hackers who collect the money and do the penetration and collect the money. And the question is, why are they separate? Why aren't there integrated enterprises? And before I get to that, let me say, it's a minor objection, but there's constant reference of ransomware families. Now, my dean always talks about my faculty as a family, and I object to that. I object even more to the notion that ransomware organizations should be families. And it sort of, you might say, carries over a little bit the mafia notions that I don't think particularly belong here. So, Ronald Coase got a Nobel Prize for writing 2 papers. One you've all heard of. The first one, which he wrote in 1939, simply asked an interesting question, which no one had ever asked before, which is, what should be done within the firm and what should be purchased through the market? And that eventually turned out to be the most interesting question about industrial organization. I think that it raises particularly interesting, or say, illegal markets, I think, offer a different set of factors to be considered. So, as someone who studies drug markets, I think very much about the need to control the number of individuals who can inform against a sort of senior figure in the drug trade. And so drug organizations tend to be quite small and quite hierarchical, so there are not a lot of people that deal with the senior managers. And that suggests that you would separate, you would purchase in the market rather than integrate more activities into the firm itself. On the other hand, it's even more difficult to develop trusting relationships with suppliers and to observe quality. And that sort of pushes towards integration. So I have no strong priors, but the question then is, what led to the change in 2020? Is it just that somebody had the insight that you could do it better by separating them? But for me, that's a really interesting question, as well as to what the division between the hackers and the developers of 85-15. What is that? The distribution of risk, distribution of effort? What underlies that formula, so to speak? So finally, let me come to Michela Riccardi's paper. And I think of invoices for fictional transitions as kind of criminal elixir. It does everything for you. I mean, just take a little bit of this and you'll be more powerful in 7 different ways. Money laundering is just as one of those ways. 207 cases involving 11 billion euros. That's quite impressive. So 50 million per euro. On the other hand, you discover that there are many offenders and many clients, and still, I did maybe the wrong arithmetic, but I came out with implied euro per entrepreneur sort of client, I think, of about 80,000 euro, not small. One of the things I do love about this paper is that, once again, illegal markets mirror legal markets. The Chinese are the low-cost providers. But that then raises interesting question. Well, let me first of all talk about this. This is a descriptive paper. It allows us to see the nature of the offense and characteristics of known offenders. And it's a reminder that there's a real reward to understanding how businesses work. When someone like me, really knows nothing about how business works. And that really limits what I can do as a scholar. One of the things I can do is work with Michela and that solves that problem. But it really is important to invest in how these things operate. And even though there's the problem of the that all we can see is what criminal justice system shows up, it still gives us a lot of insight about how this actually works in the real world. What fascinated me is, again, the sense that illegal markets work quite poorly. Remember, Michaela, presenting the paper, I think, talked about there was an average of 8.3% as the margin, so money taken off, but that it ranged between 1.5% and 22%. Now, that's a huge range. Could it be that we don't know anything about the quality of the services offered? Maybe Italians, it's not just a sort of preference for dealing with people who speak the same language and look like you, but maybe Italian IFT entrepreneurs offer better quality, or it's a specialized service that works in particular industries, lower communication cost trusts. Maybe the Chinese only handle large sums, and what we're seeing is not just sort of the price for a given amount in a transaction, but sort of represents the whole range. It's hard to think that any of them sort of really could account for. I just focus on the difference between the average of 8% and what the Chinese offer of between 1% and 2%. Very hard to see any of these as justifying a fourfold difference. And as I said, I think illegal markets in general just don't operate very well. Everyone very poorly informed and not very good at their business. Okay. All right. Future research. So, Cato the Elder would end every speech by saying, Carthage must be razed. I end every comment about money laundering research by saying, we need access to the data that governments have collected from these encrypted communication systems developed for criminal enterprises. And we're going to hear, I think, from Joseph Cox, the book called Hardwire, about the ANOM, which was a encrypted communication system that was set up, I think, by the Australian government working with the FBI. And it produces a huge number of unfiltered. I mean, this is not in any way affected by law enforcement targets. This is just the criminals out there talking to each other. And that's a data set that we really could use to develop a much better understanding of money laundering. At the moment, only researchers in police forces have access. And when I say researchers in police forces, that clearly is describing a very tiny universe, and in particular, well-qualified ones. So I think future research in this area would benefit a lot from having access to those data. And finally, as I think Domenico said, a lot depends on macroeconomic events that sort of come out of the blue. When Chinese money laundering organizations may completely transform the money laundering market, and they're the consequence of Chinese government deciding to restrict capital outflows. Who would have thought? If they change that rule, I do not think we're going to go back to the status quo, but it's a reminder that there are lots of shocks here that come unrelated to our concerns as students of crime. Thank you very much. Questions? First from the audience at the back.
Good morning. Thank you to the presenters for your wonderful presentation. I have a question for Mr. Foley. Based on, well, first of all, thank you again, but building on the chair's point about ransomware operating as a disaggregated market rather than an integrated firm, I wanted to find out what policy or regulatory interventions do you think are most likely to disrupt the market structures, particularly in terms of asset tracing and recovery?
I think it's a really good question. What we observe in these scenarios or in the negotiations, there are various types of cryptocurrencies. So there's a lot of companies like Chainalysis, for example, that are able to track the sort of the flows, let's say, of Bitcoin. There are other cryptocurrencies such as like Monero, Zcash, Dash that have embedded privacy that make it much more difficult to undertake this tracking. What we see from these criminal networks is that they often require, or they'll ask for payment in, for example, Monero. But if you want to pay in Bitcoin, then it's going to be a 20% premium because it's more difficult for them to successfully get those funds out. So I think that people don't necessarily, or criminals don't necessarily want to keep their proceeds in cryptocurrency. They'd like to spend them in the real world using fiat currency. It's just, to me, like the airport, right? You don't bring your guns to the airport because you know that they're going to get confiscated because they're going to go through this sort of eye of the needle, right? And for cryptocurrencies, that ends up being the exchanges. So whilst it is possible to exchange with an individual, I could send you cryptocurrency and you could give me some US dollars in a car park or something like that. It's not really viable at scale. And so where you're really cashing out are via exchanges. And so I think one of the best things that regulators can do for the regulated exchanges is to effectively maintain a register. So if you knew every address that was sending in to Sean Foley's account and every address that Sean Foley shipped out to, this starts to build a very powerful data set because you can start to de-anonymize those pseudonymous addresses, turn that 256 character address into Sean Foley and then know who Sean Foley has connected to at the in and the out. So I think from a regulatory perspective, that's really the best thing that can be done. If we started to have lists, and then you can start to blacklist and grey list certain addresses, right? So you've sent it into an exchange. The exchange has custody of that asset. The asset has to be with the exchange. So if the exchange then turns around and says, where did you get that from? And you can't explain it, then maybe you can hand that over to the relevant regulator. And we've seen instances of that in the US and Europe.
Phil Kiefer.
Great papers and great discussion. Thanks. Yeah, I just had a couple suggestions for infiltration. I think following up on Peter's point, it might be useful to think about the problem of infiltration as related to low productivity and the problem of locking in assets in zombie firms. So in an ideal world, all those unprofitable firms would dissolve their assets and send them to more profitable firms. But infiltration keeps that from happening, just as a government subsidy to a bankrupt firm would do the same thing. So if there was some sense of the magnitude of that effect, that could have a real, if this is a big deal, then it would play a big role in low productivity growth in Italy. And it might be worthwhile to ponder that. On the ransomware, it was an interesting list at the end where Russia is like #1 and #2 is a fraction of Russia. In other data I've seen about cybersecurity attacks and where they come from, Russia is also #1, but then Brazil and other countries are way up there as well with very large numbers. And it might be worth speculating why there's a big difference. Is it because of the nature of the sample that you have, or is it because really there's costs to countries that are really good at launching cyber attacks, or they have organizations that are really good at launching cyber attacks, but somehow they don't have a comparative advantage in launching ransomware attacks? Why there might be that difference could be illuminated. Thanks.
Does anyone want to respond? Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much, Peter. Actually, you did a much better job than I did in talking about policy implications. You're right. They are not. I didn't say much in my presentation, just for for time constraints. I said myself that it's much easier to mention the things to do than to do them, because there is clearly a cost-benefit analysis which However, maybe I'm a bit more optimistic than you on the feasibility of some of these measures. Now, just very quickly, then perhaps we can elaborate. You know, perhaps working with the local chambers of commerce, enforcement, and other authorities can, you know, learn about entrepreneurs in difficulty. That's just one, you know, channel to explore. Also, we've been very active, as you probably have noticed, in recent years in developing quantitative indicators, risk indicators. I believe probably we are one of the most active FIUs in developing these kind of indicators. Michele mentioned a couple of them. So we believe that's a way. That's a powerful tool for doing, that's a tool for massive screening that authorities can use. Again, this is not easy, and also there is a cultural problem, of course. Enforcement is not, you know, usually they don't hire statisticians, but so there's a cultural problem anyway. But so there are some avenues. First of all, I would like to mention, to reply to your question about access to data. That's right. I mean, the main, you said, I want to see this data. You're right. These data are tremendously confidential. I mean, just to give all the audience an idea, myself, I work for the Italian FIU. We have a Chinese wall within our FIU. Since I'm doing more strategic analysis than operational, I do not see the names. Not only the names of the people, I do not see the names of the firms. Just to give you an idea, and we do develop partnerships with academia, so we cannot anonymize data. That data anonymization would be, of course, the solution, right? But in practice, we thought about it, but in practice, it doesn't work. Why? Because if you really anonymize the data, then there is not much left. Actually, there is nothing left. So you can't anonymize data. So what you can do, anyway. Yeah, I think that's, but again, we actually are working with academia. My co-authors come from Bocconi. Last year I presented a paper with London School of Economics. So we are working on that. I believe actually, paradoxically, we are the one of the FIUs which more develop partnerships with academia. So perhaps to the other FIUs, go ahead and let's.
I think it's fair to say that the Italian FIU is unique in a stream of high quality research. I mean, FinCEN's research, I don't know what that word means, that label means. So anyway, more. Thanks.
Thanks. I got a question for Sean. You mentioned that you were able to follow the ransom money through various chain hops. I would like to know how you did that. And the other question is, did you find in these accounts that you identified as accounts that receive ransom money any statistical anomalies that would allow us to give a probability on a certain Bitcoin address, whether it's an address that receives ransomware, even if we don't know that it does, so to detect it without lists and stuff like this? And one question for Domenico, did you ever consider using your infiltration algorithm to mafia investments outside of Italy, like going through transparency registers in other European jurisdictions? Is there infiltrated UBOs, or going through the company registers of, for example, Germany? Because many people in Germany would be really interested in how much we are infiltrated by you guys.
Sure, thanks. So I guess in terms of following the hops, I've been working with the Bitcoin blockchain for quite a while. So it's a totally public ledger. So everyone can download the entire set since 2009. It's hundreds of millions of transactions from tens of millions of actors. And you can see all of the links. And so actually this was much more simple than some of the work that I've done previously looking at illegal drug markets, in the sense that there are far fewer addresses. So you can just focus on those addresses and then follow them forward a few hops and see what kind of places the funds end up at. So these can be tumblers and mixers used to obfuscate the source of funds. These can be just moving to other accounts that never go anywhere. They may do nothing with them for years. We have done work in looking at trying to identify illicit actors in the Bitcoin network and looking at their characteristics. So there are things you can observe that do generate more likely or a higher likelihood of being like a kind of ransomware address. But I wouldn't say there's anything that's going to be like a red smoking gun in a sense, right? So they do tend to have, for example, shorter times. They tend to move the money quite quickly. They don't want to sit on it, for example. They don't tend to have a lot of connections, right? If you think about an individual who's using it for buying things and moving around, they may end up having multiple transactions, right? These tend to get, for the commodity ransomware, they get one in, one out. Right. I guess the splitting is one of the characteristic features that we've been able to identify that is quite identifying of ransomware as a service. So I think that's one that could be useful. It's not something that we explore on the full set of Bitcoin addresses. Yeah, thanks.
Back there. Yeah.
I want to thank all the presenters for some thought-provoking presentations. I'll confine myself just to Domenico, your presentation on the infiltration of some lawful entities by organized crime. And you say it did not actually affect the viability of the entities infiltrated. So I was wondering what was in it for the criminals if it had no impact on their viability or profitability. And then related to that, did you find any evidence of complicity or the involvement of auditors or audit firms that would have examined the financial viability of these firms, insofar as it made it easy for the infiltration to happen or difficult for it to be detected? Thank you.
Yes, first I will reply to the gentleman there. Yes, we are starting some work on merging our data with a databases of firms, of foreign firms, of firms established in foreign countries. We're just beginning to work to see what we can do. I'm not sure I got the question. If a question was about auditors, about auditing firms, yes, you are right. Yes, actually, as most of you perhaps in this room know, organized crime they do have the best, consultants in the business, and so yes, you are right. And auditing firms are obliged entities, but of course there is a gray area, a very large gray area to be exploited, and there should be more compliance. There are some, you're right in the sense that we do believe at the Italian FIU that increasing the cooperation of auditing firms and working in a more intense way with them can help. And also, of course, there are some consultants which are kind of the core of a network of firms. So that also can help, enforcement and the fight against. So there is a scope for, on one hand, pushing these actors to be more compliant. On the other hand, doing massive screens and identifying, core consultants and core auditing firms, which serve many firms. Yes.
Also to add to Kilian's comment, so there is an ongoing project with the police and Europol, which also involved us and involved some way the FIU about mapping firms abroad and then validated institutionally by the police forces across these countries. So the results of this modeling were provided to the police, which then could validate it. And this was quite successful. So now it's in second iteration, and it applies to some European countries, but also Latin American countries, for example.
Yours, and then there's a hand over.
Thank you. My question would be about Michele's paper about false invoicing. Peter already made the analysis, the parallel to legal markets where the Chinese are the low-cost providers, which naturally makes us think about quality. And then my question would be, so what would be quality in this case? What would be a high-quality false invoicing and what would be a low-quality invoicing? I could see the timeliness could be relevant, but also I would think that an indicator for a low-quality product is a high rate of detection. And indeed, you would see also in your data that the Chinese are on top in terms of the discovered cases, which is your sample. So my question would be, what would be quality in these false invoicing situation? And do these 207 cases have any indications about discussions about quality? What could it be? What do we know about quality?
Thank you for the difficult question. Now, apart from the jokes, you're absolutely right. I think it's really, this does not apply just to false invoicing. I think it applies to the money laundering market at large. What are the determinants of the price of the money laundering service? So not just within the same money laundering technique, but also across typologies, right? So why is cash smuggling more costly than false invoicing, for example? This is another question, but so I think it's a matter of, first of all, risk as well, risk of detection. I'm really not sure that the Chinese are more vulnerable to detection than others. Probably, I would think about the opposite, but I do not have empirical evidence about that. For sure, what they can apply this lower let's say fees due to this ability to spread on the differential of the fees that they apply in China on circumventing capital control, so they can do some dumping overseas. And also one of the points about the higher price by local Italian providers, I think it's two things. So first is that many of these are mafia organizations which can tend to, intimidate and force, and then can apply a higher price, but at the same time have a greater ability to catch the client than the Chinese themselves. So it's harder for an Italian entrepreneur, go directly to a Chinese provider. Usually they do through Italian professionals who then in turn relate to criminal organization as provider. So I think it's hard. I mean, we need really to understand one of our future objective is to try to better understand how clients, legal entrepreneurs get in contact with providers. And I think this could really provide some better answer to this question and that as
well. Two quick questions. Sean, you've got some really interesting data on ransomware. I was wondering, have you seen anything because obviously in Australia, one of the most hacked countries in the world, you can find any Australian's date of birth and passports on the dark web. Have you found any sort of dynamic effects in the sense that as more and more big companies get hacked like Medibank, that sort of the prices or the charges and the fees have gone up? I would have expected some kind of trends or more pressure, which would have resulted in potentially the ransoms going up, or maybe the public awareness of these attacks to sort of have this dynamic effect. In particular, it'd be interesting to see whether companies that did pay, what their reputational effect would be on their stock market returns. Did they actually, if they've made the decision to pay, did their stock market returns improve relative to the ones who didn't? I think that's kind of an interesting sort of question that we might provide some insights about corporate governance, cybersecurity, investment in cybersecurity around that. Domenico, I think you've got a really, really, really interesting data set. Coming from the Reserve Bank, I do have to ask the macroeconomic side of this. Over time, what is the sort of, are there any effects around unemployment in terms of whether the chances of survival are increasing? Because the point about opportunity cost is really important. What is the probability that a company is going to go under versus when it's not? In terms of, because you have regional analysis, you can even look at whether regions where there is better support for companies to transition out, to close shop and start a new company or find other sort of economic opportunities or state support for unemployment benefits are higher, you may actually find that these kind of macroeconomic implications lower the probability of organized crime getting infiltrated, because you find this connection between organized crime and zombie companies. It would be then interesting to say, okay, maybe there are some positive externalities related to state support for companies to close down and switch. Or alternatively, you could also say, in states where there is lower support for zombie switching, you may have higher chances of organized crime getting involved. So potentially that's something to build on with what the discussant has said.
Yeah, you have a good point. And there are already a number of studies going in that direction, but certainly there is room for further research. But yes, and zombie landing, of course, is an issue here. And so I agree with most of what you've said. And again, in the slide on the literature review, there are some studies which tackle some of the points you raised, but there is more that can be done.
Okay. Well, briefly, not because it's you, just because it's almost 11 o'clock.
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, I too was thinking about the Antonio da Costa remarks, but one of the questions for Domenica is how do mafia know that firms are in distress? So do they have a kind of network, maybe the same consultants you were mentioning, but how do they find out who to target for infiltration?
Consultants actually is a very good channel of information. More in general, well, as you may know, as we mentioned last year, unfortunately, and I believe it's not unfortunately only the case of Italy, organized crime is so much widespread in the economy and in society. And I mean, the gray area of other entrepreneurs colluding with mafia, local administrators, high-level consultants. I mean, nowadays they are very much well integrated, and so they can get information from high level, but also from very low level. I mean, we're talking about organizations which control territory, so it's kind of easy for them to get information from both, low-level chats with local people, and high-level contacts with, high-level consultants, other entrepreneurs, and so on. They have a very good intelligence service, I have to say.
Thank you very much. So that ends this session. Thank the speakers and the questions.
That's okay.
Yeah.
In order of priorities.
I like your comment about productivity. Yeah, that's a good point. It reminded me actually. Yeah. Because the mafia, what I read about it acted like a state from the South historically. They never recognized the North. So in a way, that even these guys are doing what government supporting companies in distress. They're almost, it's like very Keynesian sort of, they're trying to keep companies alive, but for a different reason, which is to want the money.
Had all that red as
Oh, yeah. Oh, sorry. Oh, okay. Thank you.
d'archiviste mes vidéos.
So I guess Morning again, everyone. I think we'll come back into session for our second panel.